Good evening, everybody, and welcome into this evening's program with the Schomburg Library about good old Alexander Hamilton, who you can see there on your screen. My name is Chris. I am the Adult Programs Coordinator at the library, and as always, I'm so happy to be spending my evening with you all, learning and growing and staying curious together. What another wonderful evening to be inside and not out in the murky, cold wetness. And here we are all together. I cannot wait to hand things over to tonight's speaker, but before I do, just a few friendly Zoom reminders. You'll notice that closed captions are turned on, and you can turn those on or off as you wish during the program. Your cameras and microphones are off, but if you have any questions at all for either me or tonight's speaker, feel free to use the Q&A box on your Zoom toolbar. That's the best way to reach out to me if you're having any technical difficulties during the program, because I'll be able to see it right away and go back and forth with you and help you solve the problem. It's also the best way for us to keep our Q&A organized for the end of the presentation. We'll take all questions for the presenter at the end of the program, but make sure you're submitting them as we go. That way you don't forget about them and we have them and we are ready to go. So without further ado, I would like to introduce this evening's presenter, Marty Lundahl. Goodness, I can never do one evening program introduction without tripping over my own tongue. Goodness sake. Marty Lundahl. Marty has been a chapter president with the Alexander Hamilton Awareness Society since 2015 and has served many roles, including chapter president, marketing director, regional director, and I'm going to say this word wrong, and Nevis Unveiling Committee member.
Nevis.
Nevis, thank you. Nevis Unveiling Committee member. She graduated from the University of Michigan, majoring in business and minoring in American history, and developed a passion for all things Alexander Hamilton long before the musical. She loves confronting myths propagated by the musical and using the recent enthusiasm for Revolutionary War history to go beyond the traditional textbooks to examine how presidents set 250 years ago are still very much a part of our daily lives. Everyone give a warm virtual welcome to Marty.
Well, thank you. First of all, to the Schomburg Public Library for hosting this, and for all of you for joining me, because for the next hour, we get to talk about Alexander Hamilton, and that is one of my favorite things to do. So first, let's start things off with a quick poll. I know you guys are answering the poll for attendance, but if you go to that same poll box and click on a quick poll, you'll be able to answer the question, how many of you have seen the musical, either in person or Disney Plus? It all counts. Whoa, lots of yeses, lots of nos. Interesting. Okay, we got one soundtrack listener. That kind of counts. You'll understand the ending at the time. Cool. Okay, so it's a lot. It's about 50-50. Very interesting. Okay. Well, for those of you that have seen the musical, you will know what I'm talking about. And for those of you that haven't, I'm gonna spoil it. But it's a 250-year-old story, so I'm not gonna feel too bad about it. Okay, so as Christopher mentioned, I work for the Alexander Hamilton Awareness Society. We are a 501c3 organization, and we work to combine the academic world and the nerds who write books and all of that stuff, read documents with the public through speeches like this and events around his birth date and the dual day and his death day. But the coolest thing about this slide is that we were founded in 2011. So that was before the musical, meaning we were nerds before it was cool. So I want credit for that. Let's zoom out a little bit and look at kind of Hamilton's moment in pop culture. So if you rewind back to 2009, Lin-Manuel first rapped what would become the first song of the musical at the White House Poetry Jam in front of Obama. And everyone thought he was crazy, but Obama was nice enough to snap along. And everyone kind of got excited about what this crazy creative genius was going to do. In 2011, the Alexander Hamilton Awareness Society was founded, and you may think it's kind of odd today that I work for the Awareness Society, but back then in 2011, nobody knew who Alexander Hamilton was. They either thought he was a president, or they had no idea, had never heard of him. They had no idea he was on money. In fact, I remember one time I was driving, and there was a radio contest, and the DJ asked the contest, who is the only non-president on money? And the caller won by saying Ben Franklin. And I gripped my steering wheel and screamed, "What about Hamilton?" So awareness was really important back then. Then in 2013, the Hamilton mixtape, which was the bones of the musical, was read at Vassar College. They got their funding. They proceeded forward with the show. And in January of 2015, Hamilton was performed at the Public Theater. It was awesome. I remember walking in and there was an usher, and I was so excited because how often do you get a musical about your favorite founding father? And I asked the usher and I was like, "Oh, are there more, history people here or more theater people?" And he looked at me completely serious and said, "There's history people?" And I was like, "Yep, that's me." So after the Public Theater debut, it obviously went to Broadway in July of 2015. The AHA Society was at the premiere. And then coincidentally, in the summer of 2015, that same summer, then Treasury Secretary Jack Lew decided that they were going to take Alexander Hamilton off the $10 bill. Not good timing on their part. So between the musical success and, I mean, we started a letter writing campaign. We've got descendants involved. Everybody tried to save Hamilton. Then in 2016, they announced that they had changed their mind and Hamilton could stay on the 10. So we are very thankful for that. And that's where we think he most belongs. There's monuments to Hamilton. There's streets named after him. There's buildings and programs and a whole bunch of things. But to have his face on our currency, a currency that he helped build for a nation he helped build, I think is a really great monument. And I hope he stays there for the foreseeable future. And then when I'm in person doing this talk, I usually bring my playbill from the Broadway premiere, but we're virtual today, so you get a picture of it. This is signed by the original cast. I actually lent it to the National Constitution Center for their exhibit on Hamilton a couple years ago, and they sent it back because they took it off display. They didn't want it exposed to too much light, and so I put it in my office right across from the window. So thanks to the musical's success, it is Alexander Hammania, and we love it. We love all of the discussions and opportunities for discussions that are happening about Hamilton and his legacy and the founding era and American history. We are so thankful to the musical for getting apparently 106 people excited about Alexander Hamilton enough to come out on a Wednesday night to watch a show. So this is so exciting for us that more people are joining our nerddom here. And so we recognize that Lin needed dramatic license. He only had a set amount of actors. He only had a set amount of time. He crammed in so much story in so little time that we are not going to fault him for those little errors and who said what when and, oh, this was before that and after that and all that stuff. But there are some very big myths that come from the musical that everybody who leaves the show come and ask us. And so I took all of those questions and I bottled them up and put them in one presentation. So hopefully we can answer a bunch of your questions before you can ask them. So the first myth we're going to talk about today is from the first song in the musical. It covers about the first 20 years of Hamilton's life. And like I said, it covers so much so well. It gets so much right. But the thing they got wrong is that they called it a forgotten spot in the Caribbean where he was born. So he was born on Nevis. It is a 36 square mile island in the Caribbean. But it was not a forgotten spot then, and it is certainly not a forgotten spot now. And if we want to get technical about it, Hamilton was not just from one spot in the Caribbean either. He has ties to a lot of different islands. So let's talk about Nevis. Nevis was Spanish settled and then British owned, and today it is the Confederation of St. Kitts and Nevis. They're an independent nation. Sugarcane was the major industry during Hamilton's lifetime, and just to show you how important the sugarcane industry was and the importance of these sugar islands in the West Indies. In 1763, after the 7 Years' War, the British debated whether to give France all of Canada or the tiny sugar island of Guadeloupe. They weighed those two land masses equally in riches because those West Indies sugar islands were so important. And Nevis was known as the Queen of the Caribbees. So that just goes to show you the quantity and quality of sugar that Nevis exported at the time. After the sugarcane industry came through, it kind of wipes out the soil pretty quickly. So it became a tourist destination as very far back, but most recently, Princess Diana went there, a bunch of celebrities go there. Michael Jordan was there a couple weeks ago. And this is like post-pandemic travel. They welcomed 300,000 visitors to St. Kitts and Nevis. And the Alexander Hamilton Awareness Society was there a couple years ago, and we put up this statue outside the Museum of Nevis History, and it's called Alexander Hamilton as a Young Man. So hopefully it's even more of a tourist destination now, so you can go get your selfie with Hamilton. But back to the 1740s and the story of Alexander Hamilton's birth. So his mother was Rachel Fawcett, and she was born in that southeast orange quadrant of St. George's Parish. So her family was from there, and she was born there, and her father and mother separated, and she moved to St. Croix with her mother. So Rachel and Alexander Hamilton's grandmother are on St. Croix, and she meets and marries planter John Levine on St. Croix. They have a son, they have a nice life, but then she is jailed for infidelity. This is Alexander Hamilton's mother, was put in jail because her husband accused her of adultery. We have no way of knowing what the situation actually was, or if, the rumors were true and everything, but this is where Lin-Manuel Miranda gets that phrase, son of a whore, from that first song. I will say that the locals on Nevis are outraged pretty much at the first song. They don't like that they are not mentioned by name. They're just a spot in the Caribbean. They would prefer to have been called Nevis. And they really don't like that Lin-Manuel Miranda called Hamilton's mother a whore. Women had so few rights back then that a man could accuse you of adultery and have you jailed. They didn't like that being brought up. So in 1750, Rachel is released and she moves to St. Kitts, which is right next to Nevis, and meets James Hamilton. He is a, quote, businessman. Okay, I put that in quotes because he is not very good at it. Not a successful story there. They have two sons, James Hamilton Jr. and Alexander Hamilton. And Alexander Hamilton was born in either 1755, 1757, or according to biographer Michael E. Newton, 1754. This is new research that's coming out. They didn't have birth certificates back then, and the records of the Caribbean are kind of a mess. So nobody knows when he was actually born. However, we know that his mother and father were not wed at the time, and therefore, no matter when he was born out of wedlock, and therefore is a bastard and was branded that way for the rest of his life. And we will see that play into his decisions and his kind of psychological choices in all the way throughout his life. So that's really important. In 1759, John Levine officially divorces Rachel, and the decree comes out that he can remarry, but she can't. So that goes back to those women's rights again. She was kind of out of luck. She had no choice and could not remarry. In 1765, the small family of Rachel, James Sr., James Jr., and Alexander go to St. Croix to collect a debt for his business. And then in 1766, James Sr. leaves the family. So this is Hamilton's dad, and he leaves. We don't know why he left. The marriage could have fallen apart like the first one. There could have been an adultery situation, or it could have been just that this family went to St. Croix where that original divorce decree was, and he found out that he could never marry Rachel and that they would always have bastard sons. So either way, he leaves the family, and it's very, very sad for them. But as I said, he was not just dropped in one spot. So you've heard me mention a couple islands. These three islands are what we call the Hamilton Triangle. So on that bottom right there, the little gray one, that's Nevis. He was born there. Then the family traveled north to St. Eustatius, which is known as Statia, where the boys were tutored in the home of a Jewess. So this isn't one of our official myths, but it's one I hear about a lot. This is why people think that Alexander Hamilton might have been Jewish. We know he wasn't. We know he was Christian. He reads the Bible to his children later in life. There's a lot of instances in his writing about it. He was not Jewish, but he was tutored in the home of a Jewess on Statia. Then the family goes to St. Croix, which is that third biggest island on the left-hand side. There is where Alexander Hamilton has his his teen years. Those are very important formative years for him. He gets a job at Beekman and Kruger, which was, as Lin-Manuel puts it, the trade and charter company. And he's actually put in charge of it at as young as 14, because Nicholas Kruger, one of the owners, needed to go to the colonies for a medical issue. And so they left 14-year-old Alexander Hamilton in charge of the entire thing. And this exposed him to so many things. This was such a part of his academic education that Hamilton himself said it was one of the most pivotal parts of his education and his upbringing. It exposed him to international currency, negotiating with people older than him, where we'll see that kind of bravado later in his life as well. It exposed him to foreign languages and foreign business practices and all of those things. So imagine 14-year-old Hamilton arguing with a seasoned, sea captain about the price of goods, and that's spoiled and we don't want that, and who can go what, where, when, and all of that stuff he was running as a 14-year-old. His mother at the time ran a store in Christiansted, the capital, but she died from yellow fever in 1768 and left the boys alone. And Hamilton left for America in 1772. The Caribbean was such a major contribution to Hamilton's identity, not just academically, like what I said, but also part of his identity to its core. He had no state alliance when he came to what would become the United States. So after the Revolution, and even during the Revolution, you saw Virginians fighting for Virginia, New Yorkers fighting for New York. All of these people had their state identities. Hamilton came in with no state identity. He wanted the whole country to succeed. And so we see him more able to compromise across those lines. So we are so thankful for his immigrant status and his academic contributions that he was able to bring from the Caribbean, that we are not going to call Nevis a forgotten spot anymore. Okay, good deal. The second myth we're going to talk about today is actually one of my favorites. So if you've seen the show, and as I've seen 49 of you have, there's the one part where Alexander Hamilton breaks the fourth wall and he talks to the audience directly. And it's during the A Winter's Ball song in Act 1, where Burr is talking about the ladies and the women, and he said they delighted and distracted him. Martha Washington named her feral tomcat after him. And Hamilton turns to the audience and says, "That's true. It's not true." So next time you're watching it, whether it's on Disney Plus or in the theater, nudge the person next to you and be like, "Not true," because it was taken from an original story from 1780. We are a big fan of primary sources, so we're going to go back to the primary source. In 1780, a British Captain Smith wrote in his journal this entry, and I'm going to read it for you. It says, "Mrs. Washington has a mottled tomcat, which she calls in a complimentary way Hamilton, with 13 yellow rings around his tail, and that his flaunting it suggested to the Congress the adoption of the same number of stripes for the rebel flag." That's not where we get the 13 stripes. So we know just from that part that this entire entry is meant to be satire. Whether it's true that she named him in a complimentary way or whatever, this whole story has been repeated and exaggerated over time. And lately, ever since 1927, when tomcat or male cat gained a sexual slang meaning, it's been taken as a way to refer to Hamilton as a ladies' man. But that, if we go back to the primary source, it did not mean that connotation back then when it was written in 1780. So we can put a big busted stamp on that. And next time they do the turn to the audience and say, "That's true," say it's not. Which brings us, as we're talking about the ladies, this is the biggest subplot of the musical and the biggest myth I get questions about all the time. Did Alexander Hamilton have an affair with his sister-in-law, Angelica Schuyler Church? So I'm going to let you kind of look at this evidence that we've kind of poured over for a while. So let me show you some primary sources. Like I said, we're a big fan of primary sources. So this is the letter that was actually quoted in the musical. It's from Angelica to Eliza in 1794. And I love how Lin-Manuel Miranda pulled actual quotes from these people's correspondence. It was so cool to hear it for the first time and be like, hey, what? I recognize that from a letter. So that was really cool to see. So this is an actual letter. And Angelica says to Eliza, I love him very much. And if you were as generous as the old Romans, you would lend him to me for a little while. Oh, Betsy, you were a lucky girl to get so clever and so good a companion. So now this is another piece of evidence. This is an example of a flirty letter from Alexander to Angelica. And this is even racy for like 2024 standards. So I'm going to try not to blush while reading it. Okay. He says, you hurt my Republican nerves by your intimacy with amiable princes. He means by amiable princes, he means that Angelica also had correspondence with very important men, including Thomas Jefferson, and who would become King George IV. So that's what he means by that. So he says, you hurt my Republican nerves by your intimacy with amiable princes. I cannot endure that you should be giving such folks dinner, while I, at the distance of 3,000 miles, can only console myself by thinking of you. Assure yourself that you are as much in my good graces as ever, and that you must be a very naughty girl indeed before you can lose the place you have in my affection. Adieu, very dear sister-in-law. So I would be mad if my husband wrote that to another woman, let alone my sister, wouldn't you? Right? Well, we know that Eliza, Hamilton's wife, saw it and was not mad, because on that letter, in a postscript, in her handwriting, it says, my Hamilton and I often talk about you with great pleasure and earnestly wish that you could be again added to our little circle, but we dare scarcely hope for so great a happiness. We will not, however, despair of meeting again on one or the other side of the Atlantic. She was living in France at the time. So Eliza clearly saw the letter, clearly read the whole thing because her postscript's at the end. She read it. She wasn't mad. And she is so not mad that she writes to her sister, yeah, we can't wait for you to come see us and all that stuff. So if my husband wrote a letter like that, I would not be inviting the girl he just wrote to come visit us and stay in our house. But Eliza wasn't deterred by it at all. That just shows that this was not secret correspondence between lovers. This was a normal kind of banter that they had. And if you kind of zoom out and look at the whole situation, it is a little different than the musical presents it. So Alexander Hamilton first courted Eliza at Dr. Campfield's house in Morristown, New Jersey in the winter of 1780. So the army was at Morristown, New Jersey, and the cantonment. Hamilton and Washington and the rest of the aides were staying at headquarters at Ford's Mansion, and the Surgeon General was at Dr. Campfield's house not far away. And the Surgeon General was Dr. Cochrane, who was married to Aunt Gertrude Schuyler. So Aunt Gertrude is sitting in this military encampment and says, I think this would be a great place for my unmarried niece to come and meet some eligible bachelors. So she calls Eliza out to stay for the winter, and Eliza comes out with her big skirts and all the snow, and she meets Hamilton and falls in love, and they court in the living room of the house in Morristown, New Jersey. They would go on to be married in December of 1780 at the Schuyler family home known as the Pastures in Albany. That was 1780. But Angelica was already married at the time. So she had eloped with John Barker Church in 1777. So it is not like the musical presents it, where Angelica met him first, fell in love, and gave him to her sister, and then always regretted it because she held a flame for him. It wasn't like that. She was already married. She already had a kid at the time. And to make matters even more complicated, Angelica and her family actually lived in France for a lot of time. They first moved to France in 1783, and they only visited home briefly for a couple of occasions before returning to the US to live in 1796 permanently. So for a lot of those years, she wasn't even in the same country. So given that Angelica was already married and her time in France, given the similar tone of Angelica's letters to other important men, and that Angelica and Eliza maintained a lifelong closeness even after Alexander's death, I'm going to say that an affair was unlikely between these two. I know he went on to have another very public affair, the Maria Reynolds affair that was also in the musical, but I would say that his affair was not with Angelica. So hopefully when you get questions about that after the musical, you can answer those too. The last myth from the musical we're going to confront today is that Burr was invited to collaborate on the Federalist Papers. So this is in the song Nonstop. It's at the end of Act One. And Hamilton is talking to Burr about how they're going to build this country after they win the war. And he says, my client needs a strong defense. You're the solution. And Burr says, who's your client? And Hamilton says, the new U.S. Constitution. And he proposes a series of essays anonymously published defending the document to the public. So what he's talking about writing is the Federalist Papers here. They needed to convince New York as a state to ratify the Constitution that they had worked so hard on. And so they wrote articles that were supposed to appear in the newspaper one by one, but they turned into this massive project, a whole series of essays that would convince not just New York, but several other states as well. So it's a project that he needed help on to write, obviously. So he collaborated with John Jay, who wrote 5, James Madison, who wrote 29, and Hamilton famously wrote the other 51. Now, I put that asterisk there because these are the numbers we currently work with. We don't actually know who wrote each essay. They were all published under the pseudonym Publius, and James Madison and Hamilton have each taken credit for different essays at different times to different sources. But in 1996, a team of scientists and statisticians and analysts looked over these documents. They looked at who used the word upon more. They looked at sentence length. They looked at sentence structure. They looked at commas. All of these things, they kind of attributed to each person's style. And these are the numbers they came up with. John Jay 5, Madison 29, Hamilton 51. So those are the numbers we're going to use. As he was looking for people to collaborate on this project with, he actually invited fellow founding father Gouverneur Morris, but Gouverneur Morris was too busy, so he declined. Then Hamilton considered William Duer, but after seeing some of his writing samples, he didn't think his writing was good enough and kicked him off the project. Why would Hamilton not have invited Burr, though? Well, Burr was well educated. His father was president of Princeton, but Burr was not known for his writings or public essays. There's a reason Lin-Manuel said that he should talk less, smile more. In 1791, Burr wrote a Federalist congressman that he had not, quote, read with proper attention Hamilton's proposal for a bank. That's insane. So right now in 2024, we like to joke that our politicians don't read the legislations and they're several pages long and all that stuff. But back then, this was like a modern politician having not heard of the pandemic. This is a big deal. This was the issue on the table, and he couldn't be bothered to read the proposal. Then, and this gets me every time. We're not supposed to talk bad about Burr, so we're just going to calm down for a second. He instructed his wife, Theodosia, to, quote, read the little book on the Constitution of the United States. This will save me the trouble of reading it. So we also know that George Washington basically disliked Aaron Burr. Burr was only on Washington's staff for about 10 days, and there is even speculation about whether he was even on Washington's staff because there's nothing in his handwriting and no official like orders and paperwork that's transferring anybody. We know that Burr wanted to write a history of war, and as I said, you will not see his writings anytime soon, because Washington said basically he could not have a security clearance. He also refused to appoint him to minister to France and discouraged then President John Adams from naming him brigadier general, because Washington basically didn't trust Burr to not become a spy. So he didn't trust him. Now, Washington and Hamilton worked so hard on the Constitution to compromise and to get the language right. Hamilton was on the style committee. It was their baby, okay? If Washington didn't like Burr, Hamilton would never have asked Burr to help write the Federalist Papers that were going to defend the Constitution that Washington cared so much about. And given that Burr was not known for his writings and that Hamilton had previously considered and declined another candidate based on their writing chops, we're going to say that Hamilton would not have asked Burr to collaborate. This might have been one of those dramatic license things where Lynn could get the Federalist Papers mentioned in passing. So we'll give him a pass on that, but he would not have asked Burr. Like I said, the musical covers so much and we love it. We are so thankful for this musical, so I do not mean to pick it apart. There's so much that the musical gets right, and in 2.5 hours, they cover so much history. They got Hamilton's childhood and youth mostly correct from the Caribbean. They covered so many of his key lifetime relationships, including his relationship with John Laurens, the fellow aide under Washington. They covered his courting and marriage to Elizabeth Schuyler. I love, this is going to be a spoiler for you non-musical people. I love how that after Hamilton dies, they give Eliza a song. They don't just end the story when her husband dies. They give her her chance to tell her side of the story. And she lived to be 97. So she lived way longer after Hamilton died. And she was actually known as the last relic of the revolution. So she actually moved from New York to DC to live with her daughter, Eliza Hamilton Holly. She lived not far from the White House, which is almost where I am right now in Virginia over here. And she was known as the last relic of the revolution. So all of the politicians of the day, all of the important people, all of the who's who in Washington, D.C. would actually come and pay homage to her and would visit her to hear her stories and to hear about Hamilton's legacy. So they paid their respects to her as that last relic of the revolution, which was a prominent position for her. I love how the musical covers Hamilton's relationship with George Washington. I think it's a little overreaching in the father-son dynamic that they depict. We don't see that in most of their correspondence, but it was definitely a very pivotal relationship for Hamilton. You don't have a Hamilton if you don't have a Washington. So that was important, certainly as a mentor. And then I love that Lynn included his children to show the softer side of Hamilton and the family side. Obviously, Lynn couldn't fit all 8 of the children in a rap rhyming situation, so they only covered one of them, or 2 of them if you count the one a little brother situation. But Hamilton went on to have 8 children, and at one point they actually had a ward. They took in a ward, a young Fanny Antle, and raised her as their own for about 10 years. Her father was a veteran. Her mother had passed away. The dad was kind of in over his head with children and debts and stuff. And so the Hamiltons took her in and raised her as their own until she could go live with her sister. So just shows you the kind of quality loving people that they were. I love how the musical also covers Hamilton's Revolutionary War service. He was a soldier at the Battery, so that song where they say, yo, let's steal their cannons, shaboom! That was actually taken from a legitimate story documented in Hercules Mulligan's journal. So Hercules Mulligan and Hamilton were at the Battery, the southern tip of Manhattan, and the British warships are coming in, and Hamilton has his gun, and they have to go retrieve the cannons to make sure that they're not captured. And so Hamilton hands Hercules Mulligan his gun, and he runs out, drags the cannon back, cool. And then the gunfire starts from the ships. So they're under gunfire, and they retreat back, and Hamilton asks for his gun back from Hercules Mulligan. And Hercules said, it's out there, like I dropped it, we were doing other stuff. Hamilton just casually walks out into the field amidst the gunfire from the warships to go get his gun. And I love how Lin-Manuel Miranda put that little story in there. That was so cool. The musical covers how he was made artillery captain March 14, 1776, how he was an aide-de-camp under Washington, and how he was a commander at Yorktown. He gained the rank of colonel. So many times people think of him as, Lieutenant Colonel Hamilton, but he was actually colonel after Yorktown. So that's cool. He was in the New York State Assembly in 1787 and was a constitutional delegate at Philadelphia. The musical also covers how he was Secretary of Treasury and founded the National Bank. He founded the Coast Guard, and it actually does a really good job of covering the major political enemies. I don't think anyone could fit all of his political enemies in a 2-hour musical or a single PowerPoint slide. But I love how it covered the big ones of Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, and John Adams. And John Adams was actually one of the ones that hurled kind of the biggest insult at Hamilton and called him in a letter the bastard brat of a Scotch peddler, which is where Lynn gets some of the adjectives from that first song too. The musical also covers the duels and death of Hamilton, and I put duels as plural because I love how it also explains the duel and death of his son, Philip, to George Eaker in a duel. Now, the musical did a great job and it covered a lot, but there was a lot of major parts of Hamilton's legacy that weren't covered. So let's go over a couple of those. Hamilton founded the US Mint. This was very important because it united the United States under a single currency. It established the dollar as the official US currency. At the time, they could have gone with, the Spanish eights, they could have gone the British pounds and pence, but he liked the decimal, he liked the dollar, that's what we have. This established one federal currency. So at the time, every state had a currency, and then there was international currency, and it was a headache to do business. Now everyone was under one single thing. And then Hamilton helped pass the Coinage Act of 1792. This is an often overlooked coinage act. I know you all have heard of it. But Hamilton wanted to coin money in smaller denominations. So he wanted more people to be able to participate in the economy. You don't go to the supermarket and pay for bread with $100 bill. You would not get change with that, right? So people would have to barter and use things other than the money, the currency. Well, by minting it in smaller denominations, it made people able to use it for those smaller purchases that they could afford. So it included all echelons of the economy and got more people to participate. And then it also had the cool effect of the marketing principle of possession. So that principle says that if you have something in your possession, you are emotionally tied to it and you are more likely to buy into it on a spiritual level. So as these people are walking around with coins and currency that says United States of America, now they are a part of the United States of America. They're participating in the United States of America, and we are united, not just individual states anymore. So Hamilton really helped get that kind of possession into more hands, which was important. Another part of this is he founded the United States Customs. So Hamilton kind of had a tall order after the Revolution. It was one's patriotic duty to smuggle, right? We had to dump the tea in the harbor and avoid the stamp taxes and all of that stuff. But now that we've won the war, we need to collect revenue to be able to fund our debts and pay armies and fund the government that we need. So we kind of had to turn the entire population's mind and attitude towards taxes. So he founded the U.S. Customs, and kind of as an offshoot of that, he became superintendent of U.S. lighthouses. So he was in charge of building and keeping lighthouses operational, which was an important part of collecting taxes because we needed to make sure that the ships came in safely with their goods and that we could see them and tax them. So that was very important. The musical also doesn't cover that at one point, Hamilton was the highest ranking military official, except for the president. So we talk about how he was lieutenant colonel, then we talk about how he was colonel. Well, actually, in 1799, he was major general. So it was during the Quasi-War. Washington had then President Adams appoint Hamilton to be major general, and there was a bunch of conversations about where he would rank amongst the major generals and who would be above him. He was put right under Washington. So Washington and him put all the plans together in case we went to war with France. Everything was ready. Supplies were gathered. Everything was ready to go. Washington was ready to leap into action and become, commander again, except in 1799, December, Washington died. So that left Hamilton as the highest ranking major general until 1800 under Jefferson. Another huge part that the musical mentions, it does, is his legal career. So it has Hamilton standing on the table and flipping the tails of his costume and saying, "I practiced the law, I practically perfected it." But I think that it doesn't really give justice to the extent of Hamilton's legal career and his legacy for that. Hamilton passed the bar after only 6 months of studying. So for soldiers in the military, they waived the apprenticeship requirement. Hamilton was all self-taught. He sat in a cemetery and studied, read books, and passed the bar, which was an oral exam at the time, after only 6 months of studying. He handled a variety of cases, including, get this, contracts, creditors' rights, admiralty, maritime insurance, and constitutional law. That's insane. That's unheard of today. You would never have a defense, lawyer handling a corporate law case unless you're watching Suits. But still, that just shows you the depth and breadth of Hamilton's legal knowledge. That's crazy. The musical casually mentions the Levi Weeks case, but it's worth more detail here. So this was America's first transcribed murder trial. It was sensational at the time. Think like OJ trial, think Johnny Depp trial, all of these things, like these were splashed in the newspapers. And for the first time, they were transcribed. Levi Weeks was accused of murdering his girlfriend, Elma Sands, and stuffing her in a well. So this was called the Manhattan Well trial. And Hamilton represented Levi Weeks with Aaron Burr and Henry Brockholst Livingston. And I know all of you sitting at home are like, wait a second, you said he would never work with Burr. What are you doing? Well, so he wouldn't work with Burr on the Federalist Papers. But the legal community of Manhattan was so small at the time. It was only about like 40 or 50 lawyers. I know you can find that in a single Starbucks today, but it was such a tight-knit community that you would see different figures on each side of different cases. Sometimes they would be working together, sometimes they would be against each other. We see this a lot, but in this case, he worked with Burr and Livingston, and Weeks was found not guilty. So that kind of it didn't do bad things for his reputation, since it was such a popular trial. People could see what a great lawyer and orator he was. Hamilton handled a lot of important cases after that. He handled Rutgers versus Waddington in 1784. This is a case that Hamilton actually represented the Loyalist, which he did a lot. He kind of had a track record for picking the underdog, and a post-revolution New York was not really kind to the Loyalists. So he defended them, and this case basically showed that U.S. treaties trumped state treaties and made the New York Trespass Act defunct. So that was really important. Then he handled the appeal of the People versus Henry Croswell. Henry Croswell was a newspaper producer, and he had been accused of writing bad things about Thomas Jefferson. So we don't know whether Hamilton took this case because it was a precedent-setting case, or if it was a chance to kind of rehash some negative things about Jefferson. But either way, he gave an impassioned 6-hour argument in favor of freedom of the press. And it eventually led to establishing truth as a defense against libel. So before this case, if you wrote something negative about somebody, they could sue you, whether it was true or not. It was Hamilton who said, but if it's true, I think it should be okay. We should hold our public figures accountable. And so because of that, we have a lot fewer lawsuits today. We also see Hamilton's lasting influence from past and present, quoting the Federalist Papers that he wrote. So Marbury versus Madison, that was a groundbreaking case that established the Constitution was actual law and subject to judicial review. So this is why the Supreme Court can say something is unconstitutional. It's because of this case that quoted Federalist Number 78, which Hamilton wrote. And you see, quoting of the Federalist Papers nonstop in a whole bunch of places. The 1970s had FCC cases that quoted the People versus Croswell for freedom of press. You have TV channels who want to broadcast live murder trials, quoting the freedom of the press argument that Hamilton made. And then even a case from 2022 quoted Federalist Number 11, West Virginia versus the EPA. I don't know anything else about the EPA, so don't come at me with that, but I know it quoted Hamilton. So there's all these things today are still quoting Hamilton's Federalist Papers, and he still has a lasting impact on the legal community. And then one of the biggest things that the musical doesn't cover is actually the report on manufactures. So Hamilton delivered this report in 1791, and it was dead in the water. Congress didn't accept any part of it, but slowly over time, America would gain all of the things that Hamilton proposed, and it would go on to create our entire American economic system. So it was kind of his clairvoyant moment, his best planning, his magnum opus, his vision for America, and it was dead in the water when he delivered it. So he wanted protective tariffs and industrial subsidies. And if that sounds familiar, it's what we have now. Hamilton saw this manufacturing economy as America's future and a better use of America's resources than the agrarian, feudal kind of squire economy that we had before that Thomas Jefferson was more in favor of. And he wanted that manufacturing economy because it had opportunities for everyone and opportunities for all types of talents. So we see in this oldest published letter from 1769, Hamilton writes to his friend Nettie Stevens, I wish there was a war. And this is often quoted as kind of showing Hamilton as like a warmonger and everything, but it's not. He was really trying to create an economy where everybody's talents could be elevated without a giant global catalyst like a war. Hamilton needed that war to lift him out of poverty and lift him out of his station and gain the contacts that he got, including his father-in-law and George Washington and his wife, and all of those people came from this war that he was able to participate in. But he didn't want other Hamiltons to have to wait for a war to raise their stations. He wanted this manufacturing economy to take everyone's individual talents and help raise them. And it's kind of problematic now reading it because it mentions that women and children should work. And now we have, child labor laws and maternity leave and things like that. But he was just saying that he wanted everyone to be able to participate in the economy, which is a theme that he is known for. Hamilton believed in the manufacturing economy so much that he founded planned communities. He co-founded Jersey City and every time I give this speech in New York, they always laugh at me because Hamilton wanted Jersey City to rival Manhattan one day, and they all kind of get a chuckle out of that. But it was so successful that the manufacturing communities moved out and the banks moved in, and now it's known as Wall Street West. So it was very successful. So today we have busted so many myths. We're not going to call Nevis a forgotten spot anymore. We know now about the Hamilton Triangle. The Tomcat reference was not true. Hamilton did not have an affair with Angelica, and Hamilton would never have invited Aaron Burr to collaborate on the Federalist Papers. And then hopefully we moved beyond the musical and beyond that 2D version of the guy on your $10 bill, and even beyond the 3D version of the guy that you see here. This is the famous Sirachi bust. This was actually Eliza's favorite version of Hamilton. She called it his greatest likeness. And after he died, she actually lent this bust to John Trumbull, who painted the portrait that was adapted to our $10 bill. So the $10 bill portrait is actually based on this bust. And it's at the Grange. You can go see it in the front foyer. She used to keep it there and walk past it and talk to him all the time. And there's another bust actually at Monticello, which is Thomas Jefferson's home in Virginia, Charlottesville. And I remember touring it and think, why is there a bust of Hamilton in Jefferson's back parlor? And it was because Jefferson had the bust of Hamilton on one side, and then a taller, larger, grander bust of himself on the other side facing him, so they could be opposed in life and death, which is petty. So I encourage you to not throw away your shot. If you haven't seen the musical, and I'm looking at you, 34 of you, go see it. It's so good. I know it just left Chicago, but there are going to be other opportunities. Go see it on Disney Plus. It's a great show, and it'll give you a lot of history in a short amount of time. And if you can, go see these historical sites. Pandemic restrictions are lifting, travel's up, tours are up. Come to speeches like this. We have a great time. You can go see the Hamilton Grange in New York City. This was what was supposed to be his retirement home. And fun fact, that Levi Weeks, we talked about him defending. His brother Ezra Weeks was the general contractor on the construction of this home. Go see Trinity Church, where he's buried, not far from there in New York City. And Trinity Church, you actually don't even have to go into the cemetery. You can actually kind of stay on the street. It's kind of raised up, and you can see his grave from the street. And he has a big headstone monument. And you stand in the street and you look at his monument, and then you look up a few more degrees and you see the New York City skyline. You see Freedom Tower, where the World Trade Center used to be. And you think, wow, this is a legacy to Hamilton, but this is what Hamilton actually built. He built America's financial district, and that's a really cool view to have. It's one of my favorite views. Go see Yorktown, Virginia, where they had the big biggest last battle of the Revolution. Go see the Schuyler Hamilton House in New Jersey, where Hamilton courted Eliza. The New Jersey DAR runs it now. They do some really cool programming. And if you're feeling like a Caribbean vacation and you need a tan, go see Nevis. Go see our statue on Nevis. But whatever you do, go and interact with history. If you can't make it to any of these, just look around at our society. It is a lot based on Hamilton's ideas and ideals, and we are so grateful for him and for what he was able to do for our country. So with that, I will go to questions. I see we have a couple of those in the chat already.
Marty, thank you so much. There's been a lot of compliments popping up in the chat. That was a wonderful presentation. While we wait for people to throw a couple questions in, I have one of my own. When did you decide that Alexander Hamilton, and like what made you decide that you were going to champion Alexander Hamilton? That was your mission in life. That was your historical figure.
So he's my favorite because I'm a very competitive person, and everyone loves Ben Franklin, inventor, do-gooder, love it. He's great. Everyone loves George Washington. He's easy to love, great guy. But I think you kind of go and research more into history and you see that there's a big split. There are Jeffersonians and there are Hamiltonians. And Hamiltonians are clearly right. And so I liked the fact that there's this opposition and there's this research that can be done and people to fight. So I like that it's Hamiltonians versus Jeffersonians, and I picked my guy and I'm sticking with it.
So my other question, usually I'd save this for the end, but again, while people are pondering some questions, you were very thorough. I'm sure they're like, what on earth could I possibly ask?
I try and do my best. I know it's a fire hose of information, but
what is something within studying Alexander Hamilton's life that has been your biggest takeaway and has affected the way you live with the world and how you interact with it? I know you had this amazing call to action at the end of go interact with history. And we do live in especially us in the Chicagoland area, there's so much history to engage with outside of Hamilton history, obviously. And I love that mission. But what about Alexander Hamilton? Do you go, you know what, because of all these things I learned, I do this now, or this is the wisdom I want to impart on people in my life?
So yes, I love that question. Thank you. The biggest thing that Hamilton did that I want to copy and steal from him is that he put such an emphasis on reading. He inherited 34 books from his mom. After his mother passed away, he was entitled to none of her estate. And his aunt and uncle purchased the books from her estate with the little money that they had, and they gave Alexander Hamilton 34 of her books, and he read them. And he went and studied in Elizabeth, New Jersey, sitting in a cemetery, and he studied and he studied and he studied and he read the law. And we have so many records of him studying throughout, battles and things like that, notes in his ledger book, everything like that. He studied the ancients, he studied civilizations, he studied civil law and all those things. And so he had such a large capacity for knowledge that if somebody came at him with any sort of fight, he was like, oh yeah, here's some Greek history for you. How about that? So I think what I take from him most is always read, always look at the primary sources, never be afraid to write a multi-page argument or give a 6-hour impassioned speech, because it's all the information you can give is important.
I have to say, as a library, I think I'm legally required to endorse what you just said to read. Would you mind going back just to showing that bust of Alexander Hamilton again?
Yeah, sure, no problem.
I just want to check out how handsome he is, I'm assuming.
Right? Isn't he dreamy? I mean, that's really why I like him.
Can you talk a little bit about his death and the duel?
Yes. So I get this question a lot. So people ask, why did he duel? And I will say that your biggest currency back then, 1790s, 1800s, was your honor. So Hamilton's kind of political clout was declining at the time. He had made political enemies so much, his party was falling apart. He had very little kind of sway in the political realm, and all he had was his honor. So if he had more time after the duel, and we can theorize about what would have happened if he came out alive and all that stuff, but if he had any prayer of having any clout or power after the duel, he needed to preserve his honor. And Burr questioned and challenged his honor. And it was the climate at the time that if you were challenged in a duel, you fought in it. Very few people actually died in duels. You would stand sideways and the guns were very unreliable. In fact, so many people participated in duels that they had dueling pistols specifically for this. Like, this was not uncommon. It just happened to kill 2 Hamilton men over the course of 4 years. So Hamilton engaged in this duel with Burr because Burr challenged him. It was a way to preserve his honor, and it turned out badly for him. He wrote that he was going to throw away his shot. And there is actually no proof that of who shot first. Different accounts say different things. You know, obviously the seconds are biased and they were the only ones there. But there is a story that after Hamilton was shot, so they have the duel, he's shot, he's in the boat getting, you know, taken back to Manhattan, and he says, "Oh, don't touch my gun, it's still loaded." It wasn't. He had shot most likely into a tree somewhere. But the question is whether he was throwing away his shot or if it was a hair trigger as he was being shot himself. The fact that he said, "Don't touch my gun, it's still loaded," meant that he did not mean to shoot. So he would probably have gone through with his plan to not shoot and still preserve his honor. So that's why he dueled, and that's why it ended badly.
Gotcha. Did any of Hamilton's descendants go into public service?
Yes, so many of them. There are so many descendants because he had a lot of kids. I know a lot of them participated in the military. Some of them were, you know, into politics. A lot of them were lawyers. One of his sons, it's hard to think of, you know, a lawyer as a public service these days, but back then it really was. One of Hamilton's sons oversaw the divorce of Aaron Burr towards the end of Aaron Burr's life. So that if you're gonna walk away with a fun fact, walk away with that one because that's awesome.
Oh, that might be my favorite fun fact.
Yeah.
I wonder, like, just gotta wonder if he relished that.
Yeah, right. And then it was like the divorce came out, and then Burr died very shortly after. He's like, "I'm out. I can't."
What was the biggest surprise while researching Hamilton?
What was the biggest surprise? I want to say that it's just how similar these guys are to current politics. So we kind of idealized the founding era. These were giants among men. These were the most educated. These were the most flowery language. Our cliches come from them. You know, we're so rooted in our nostalgic history in the founding era. And they were just like us. They did not like their honor being, you know, questioned. They fought back. They had biting insults that they preserved. Like, we think social media is bad, but John Adams' letters are out there, you know. They're so similar. And there's a story like right before the duel, actually. So the duel was on July 11th. And on the July 4th celebration at the Society of Cincinnati, which was a club for officers of the Revolution, Hamilton is seen jumping on a table drunkenly and singing a song, a patriotic song. So, like, we have that today. We have alcohol and patriotic songs today, you know? So it's really cool to see the link between then and now and how similar they are. I think that was the most surprising because when you learn in school about, you know, George Washington and them, you hold them in such high esteem, but they're guys just like us.
Absolutely. Would Hamilton not have been eligible for the presidency due to where he was born?
I love this question. I love it so much. He would have definitely been eligible to be president. When we adopted the Constitution, it made everyone citizens who was here. So he would have been counted as a citizen wherever he was born. He would have been eligible for the presidency, but he never would have become president. In fact, there is a novel called President Hamilton, I believe, and it answers the question of what would have happened if he lived and became president. And it's just a wacky, it's so wacky. It's like, no, he would never become president. I don't think he would have wanted to. I don't think he would have gotten the votes. Maybe if he had enough time to really turn his reputation around, like, you know, Eliza was the relic of the revolution. Maybe he would have had some nostalgic clout there too. But I don't think he would have wanted to become president, even if he was eligible. There's a lot of power with the money. And as Secretary of Treasury, he influenced a lot. So I think he would have kept up with that kind of string of power.
Wonderful. Before I let you go to enjoy the rest of your evening, I want to be respectful of the time we asked of you. And because you mentioned a book just now, are there any books about Alexander Hamilton that you would recommend for our guests to pick up, if they wanted to learn a little bit more about this topic?
So many and so many more now that the musical is so popular. So I'm going to give you just a couple.
Okay.
Number one is the Ron Chernow book. It is an 800-page deal. It is a big deal. And it is really long, but a really good narrative. So if you're in the mood for a biography, it's the biography that the musical was based on. So I recommend that. If you're looking for a shorter, more concise biography, Alexander Hamilton by Richard Brookhiser is about 200-ish pages long. It covers a lot of stuff, and it's one of my favorite quick study. Go back and read a million times once. And then if you like really funny books, there is a book, Alexander Hamilton's Guide to Life by Jeff Wilser. It is my favorite recommendation to people about Hamilton because it talks about Hamilton's guide to life today and what Hamilton would say, about leisure time and what Hamilton would say about family time. And it's a really fun, quick read.
Wonderful. I can guarantee you the library, Schaumburg Library has to have the book that the musical is based on. I guarantee you that's in our collection somewhere. But anything we don't have in our collection, remember, we can always reach out to the libraries and see if they'll lend it to us. Marty, I have a couple guests asking if you potentially might have somewhere tucked in all your stuff, a list of resources that you might be able to share with us that I could forward along to the registered patrons tonight.
I can certainly come up with something for you. But other than the three books that I mentioned, the biggest resource is Founders Online, founders.gov. It is a digitized compilation of all of these primary sources.
Oh,
And you can
wonderful.
search by author, you can search by recipient, you can search by word. You can find how many letters George Washington mentioned the word family in, and it's just an amazing resource. And I read so many things, and it's all in typeface instead of in the crazy elaborate script that you have to kind of squint 6 times for.
Oh, that's amazing. As someone who used to work in a museum, y'all, I cannot recommend the research she's talking about enough. Primary sources are the place to go to learn anything. And I think they're so fascinating because I think they give such a stronger insight personally from my experience into the characters of those individuals. I think you can pick up a lot from the way they write things sometimes. And their sense of humor and all that other good stuff. So Marty, thank you so much for spending your evening with us and sharing your passion and your knowledge with us. I know you're getting so many thank yous in the chat, and so many people are feeling inspired and enlightened, and that's wonderful because that's what I like to do for my patrons. And so I'm glad we came together to bring them that experience. So I want to make sure again, like I said, respectful of the time that you promised to us and send you on your way. And thank you everybody for joining us this evening. And I hope to see you guys at a future program, be it virtual or in person at the Schaumburg Library. Have an amazing evening, everybody.
Thank you for hosting.